morning and welcome to the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency podcast, Civil Rights and You, the show that focuses on federal, state, and local civil and human rights issues and how they impact your daily life. My name is Charles Bryson, Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, under the auspices of Mayor Lyda Crewson and your host. Playing as the intro theme, as always, is Ronnie Jordan's After Hours, and we do not own the rights to that music. Podcasts can be seen at Facebook Live and recorded at mycitymymusic.com. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we are going to talk all things 2020 census. With me are a number of people who will talk about the census, what the impact of not filling out the census form is, and how it's going to roll out, which I believe is April 1st. So with me are Emmett, what's your last name again?
Morris.
Emmett Morris with the Civil Rights, sorry, you're not. You're with the Census Bureau.
Exactly.
Ed Bryant with the United Way of Greater St. Louis.
And Carolyn Fan with
Early Education, Advocacy, Representation, and Leadership for Youth. We're a statewide Asian American organization.
Thank you all. So let's have a brief sort of educational session. So, Emmett, what is the census?
The census is basically a count of the population of the United States, all of the U.S. territories. Everyone counts.
Everyone
everyone
no matter
counts.
if you're a citizen,
No matter
quote
if
unquote,
you're
or
a
not.
citizen or
Everybody is counted.
non-citizen. The only exception to that would be if you're someone that's not a citizen and you're visiting during the time that we conduct the census, then you're not part of the count. But if you're a non-citizen and you happen to be living in this country, this is your home or has become your home, then you are counted in the census.
And that includes like felons. So people who are in prison,
everyone.
people who go away to school, doesn't matter.
Everyone. Our job is to count everyone, count them once, and count them in the right place.
Now, this is a federal law that is part of our history.
It's part of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution requires that we have a census every 10 years for the purposes of apportionment, determining how many seats are in Congress, representatives. And also it helps determine the allocation of some $675 billion of federal funds on an annual basis.
Can you say that number again? Because people don't realize
$675 billion with a B dollars annually. The census numbers help to determine how that money is distributed.
And so by filling out the census, you are showing where need may be in a particular community.
Yes. The census determines, the data from the census determines decisions. You could also say the data from the census determines democracy. Mm-hmm. And needs are not necessarily funded, but numbers are funded. Numbers connected with needs are funded. So it's an opportunity for people to stand up and be counted, and there should be no cause or alarm for any repercussions from being counted, coming forward and being counted.
So in a minute, I want to hear from Ed and Carolyn, but then later on I want to talk about how that's going to roll out in the city and the county, because you're
Sure.
basically helping to oversee the process, correct?
Yes, I'm the partnership coordinator for the state of Missouri. We have a staff of about 9 or so in the state, and that number is growing. And our job is to get up there and to help build partnerships and to empower people in the community so that they become the trusted voices of the census, and we supply them with information and resources because they are closer connected to the people to be able to build bridges and make people aware of the census, to inform them and to tap down on some of the myths and mythologies that are out there.
Myths and legends.
Exactly, yes.
Ed, you're, and I don't know if this is true for you, Carolyn, but I know, Ed, you're part of the state process as well. So if you would tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about what's going on state level, and then sort of the United Way and the group's role that you're representing.
Yeah, so back in December of 2018, Governor Parson put out an executive order creating the State Complete Count Committee, which allows him to appoint up to 30 people across the state to help provide awareness across every county in the state of Missouri around Census 2020. As Emmett said, the federal government allocates about over $675 billion in funds for programs such as SNAP, WIC, Head Start. I mean, a lot of the federal programs that many of our member agencies utilize to meet the needs of clients on the ground. Missouri receives about a little over $11 billion of those funds annually via the federal government. And by the most recent data that we have, Missouri's undercount could result in about $1,300 per person of funds that we are not are able to receive.
And so that's the number that has been utilized throughout this process, basically because we know how much money the state and therefore the region gets. We also know technically how many people were undercounted.
Yeah, exactly, and also, you multiply that by 10, so that's literally $1,300 per person that we were not getting or have potential of not receiving from the federal government. So we pay our taxes; those dollars return or should return back to our states to fund programs such as Medicaid and the other programs that I mentioned. So that's why we're interested in this, because our primary responsibility as one of the largest nonprofit funders of social and health and human services is to make sure that our agencies, as well as the agencies of our other United Ways across the state, have access to those dollars to meet the needs of the clients that we see every day. So at the state level, what we're doing is making sure that we create some awareness platforms. So the state website will launch pretty soon, as well as we're looking at the undercounted or hard to count populations across the state, whether they're rural or whether they're urban, and trying to develop some strategies to make sure that we can effectively reach them in the most effective manner. So, obviously the Census Bureau has its operational things that it has to do, but many of our member agencies are the everyday people that are touching folks on a daily basis. Before we began recording, we were talking about the Urban League. So the Urban League is actually a member agency, United Way, here in Greater St. Louis, and they operate some of the one of the largest Head Start programs in our region. So those are folks that are actually touching clients, touching people that are literally hard to count populations. Kids that are under 5 are one of the hardest to count populations. Those kids are in Head Start. When we look at some of the hard to count census tracts, many of those census tracts the Urban League sits right in the center of those. So we want to make sure that we leverage those partnerships and make sure that the people that have the closest connection to those people are able to help encourage them to complete the census.
Carolyn, do you have anything to add to that process?
Sure. So I sit on the county's Complete Counts Committee, and then I have a standing invitation to the city CCC and the state CCC. A lot of people they don't really understand the full purpose of the census, but it's the underlying foundation of a lot of the decisions that are made. So I moved here to Missouri about 5.5 years ago, and I was like, wow, the roads are not in great condition. Well, one of the things that the census determines is funding for roads, hospitals, schools, and emergency services. And so everyone has a role to play in the census, not just in filling it out themselves, but then also, there's a lot of census jobs going on. I worked for the census in 2010, loved the job. Instead of paying $100 a month for a gym, I got paid to get in shape. It was fantastic, man. So, there's a lot of things to do about the census, but, really, if you don't like your roads, you don't like where the stop signs are, all of that comes out of kind of census numbers, and so that's why we got to fill it out. But do it for the roads and for the potholes.
Emmett, so we all had a meeting yesterday, just to
Certainly.
clarify that for the record. You were talking about some of the initiative items that the Census Bureau was looking at in terms of not only there's a hard to serve population, but even in that strata, there are specific groups that the Census Bureau is looking at.
Yes.
Could you enumerate some of those?
There are, what Ed talked about earlier was, and what you're talking about to your point there is what we identify as the hard to enumerate. For example, people living in poverty, people experiencing homelessness, renters, people between the ages of 18 and 24, in particular black men between the ages of 18 and 24, 34, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, people in rural communities, immigrants, farm workers, migrant workers. I mean, that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, but also it includes members of the LGBT community, members of the disabled community. So these are various components, cohorts of our population, and we have found that the best way to inform them about the census and motivate for them to participate and to educate them that there is a WIFM, everybody's favorite radio station, What's in It for Me, is to build what we call complete count committees and partnerships in cities and counties and governments and communities throughout the country, throughout the state, so that they take on ownership of the census process. And I mentioned this before, so that they can start to identify ways and techniques and strategies to reach those people, to convince them that this is something that definitely has an impact on their lives and also on their futures.
So it's not really the Census Bureau that is in every city, in every region. It really is the Complete Count Committee that is expected to really do that
We
work.
rely very heavily on the complete count committees around the country, and Chicago is really the region is sort of the mother or father, if you will, of the complete count committee structure. But there are a lot of people that don't want to commit to becoming a committee, a formal entity, but nevertheless they can help us in terms of recruiting, as Carolyn said. They can help us in terms of getting the word out. They can do what they can do. They may not be able to do everything on the list, but they can do what they can do. So we consider those people to be partners.
But the goal, I guess, would be reach those folks in your strata,
in your orbit, in your
influence,
in your circle,
and that allows, because one of the things we talked about yesterday was overlap, and one of the things that concerns me in the opposite is there may not be, everybody wants to stay in their silo, but we want people to overlap, because what's the common? It takes you 6 touches,
seven
before somebody really.
Right.
So the more overlap we have in the complete count committee, the better off we may be.
What I was going to say, one of the things that we're hoping that happens, so all of 3 of us have census employment experience. Carolyn worked in 2010. I worked the census in 2000, doing what Emmett does. And what we want to do is to make sure that filling out and completing the census is a normal thing for everybody, that it isn't an abnormal thing, but that everybody, once you get the card or the information, or however the Census Bureau contacts you, that it'll be something that you just do because you realize, first of all, the benefit for you, the benefit for your community, benefit for your family, and that it's something that you don't have to necessarily have questions about completing, and that if you do have issues and questions about it, whether it's language barriers or what have you, that you also have access to the resources to help you complete the form. And so, one of my concerns, so one of the things that she mentioned earlier was like the transportation issue. Now, we're a health and human services agency. We don't necessarily do transportation planning, but we know that from the things that we've been seeing for the last decade, that one of the unique barriers to accessing social services is transportation in our region. And so if you have that barrier to getting access to those services, then we want to make sure that folks have access to the services that our agencies are providing. And so that's why these things are all connected, and so we want to make sure that folks know that all this stuff is connected to, our motto is helping people live their best possible lives. We want to make sure that our region flourishes. Getting an accurate and complete count is one of the many things that we have to do to make sure that St. Louis flourishes.
Everyone in this country at some point has an intersection on the road that's connected with the census or its data. The monies that we're talking about in terms of the federal budget, $675 billion, that not only goes to the nonprofit sector, such as Ed's organization, the United Way, and others similar to it, it also benefits the private sector and the public sector. What Carolyn talked about earlier, most people live their daily lives as they should, But this is a time to point out to them roads, water, bridges, emergency services, school lunches. Not necessarily saying that people take these for granted, but we should show them, demonstrate to them the connections back to census data.
I see on one of your the 2020 Complete Count forms, it talks about 50 ways census data is used. And, it talks about planning for hospitals, nursing homes, and clinics. You fill out the form, part of it is your age, and therefore there's an ability to understand where a hospital or where an emergency facility should be made. Directing funds for service for people in poverty. We understand that. To your point, developing analyzing local trends, so where roads need to be put and obviously they need to be paved, et cetera. So there's a number, so this is an interesting sheet. 50 ways census data is used, because it really does, as you all say accurately, it touches everybody one way, shape, or form.
Right. No one is off the grid, no matter how much money you have or how much money you don't have, wherever you fall in the economic strata. At some point, you're going to intersect with the information that's, or some service, or some instrument, tool, something that is in existence that has derived by, or it's been determined by census data.
So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics. Now, April 1st is the day.
Yes.
But let's talk about what's going on behind the scenes before we get to April 1st.
April 1st is Census Day, and more or less traditionally was the day where we conducted the census. Up until 1960, we hired people to go out and go door to door. Beginning in 1960 was the first mail-out census questionnaire. Now, fast forward to 2020, this is the first census where you can go on your telephone, and what we are really encouraging people to do is to go to the internet. It doesn't mean that we've done away with the paper census questionnaire at all. Around mid-March is when everything becomes live with the census. The phone lines will be active. Those people that about 20% of the country will right away get paper questionnaires. Mid-March is also the time when the internet will be active. There will be, prior to that, mid-March, there will be a series of mailers inviting people to go to the internet, getting them, as my dad used to say, on the clue bus that the census is here, it started up, what it means, how it impacts your life, how it's important. And then by the fourth or third mailing, I'm not sure which, if a household has not responded, they will get a paper questionnaire in the mail. At the same time, there are going to be groups like the State Complete Count Committee, the County Complete Count Committee, the United Way, Carolyn's group, that are going to be beating the drums and telling people about what to expect, how to access the information. There are also groups that are talking about forming places where people can go, like community centers or libraries, to get assistance with completing the census questionnaires.
I know yesterday, and I don't know if that person was from the county library or the city library, but they have basically already put things in place to allow people to take part in a census online, as well as I think they're also going to do a little bit of publicity or advertising around the fact that they're going to make those spaces available.
And also, they've been very helpful in helping us with recruiting efforts, which I want to make note that if anybody's looking for work, they can call this number 855-JOB-2020 or go to our website, 2020census.gov/jobs. We are still actively recruiting people, especially for our non-response operation where people would go door to door. I think the pay in the general area here is around $19.50 or so.
And obviously you're going to need a lot of those folks, unfortunately, because people will not do that online. But how long does that job last? Roughly,
I would say roughly, probably to the end of July or so, at the long shot of it.
And you're hiring now, so
we're hiring now. What we're recruiting now.
I'm sorry,
and then we're building up our recruiting pool, and then we won't start the hiring process until around the spring or so of next year.
Now, is this considered a federal job or sort of a contractual?
It's a federal job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a federal job. It's part-time with flexible hours. You could, if your schedule permits, you could work as up to many as 8 hours a day. There's paid training and then paid reimbursement for your mileage.
Okay, and so you're looking for a lot of people in the St. Louis region.
We're looking for a lot of people to go online and apply, and the jobs will be, for the most part, going door to door. We want to hire from within communities as much as possible, so that person that's knocking on the door has some affinity or more in common with the person on the other side of the door.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I really loved my census job, and I think this is partially why I've turned into a bit of a census nerd. You get to find a lot of cool stuff about your community, right? So I found out that one of the buildings I always thought was residential was actually a front for the city's mechanical engineering department. I mean, it's just cool. You know, you get to meet your neighbors. If you're an outgoing person, it's great. Like I said, you get good exercise. And the city's public libraries, at all of the city's public libraries, every month, there will be hiring events for the census. These jobs pay pretty well. It could be part-time. I had a lot of students who worked for me in 2010, and it was great for them. So I just think it's a lot of fun, frankly.
And as you say, a lot of work, a lot of fun, but also you learn more about your community than you would have known previously.
Yeah.
Because it's boots on the ground. So we've gotten to the sort of advertisements, et cetera, for the day. Now, will everybody get a postcard or something in the mail that says, please fill out the
Our
census?
mailings starting earlier in March or so, or the end of February, early in March, will go to households, not to individual people. And just like the census questionnaires that are mailed out, the information that we'll be mailing out will be addressed to resident of a particular address.
So if somebody sees resident, because I know I get resident mail all the time and it just disappears. If somebody sees the Census Bureau has sent it out, they need to hold on to that.
They need to hold on to it, to pay attention, to read it over, and to see what it's saying and what it's indicating to them. There probably will be a website on there or telephone numbers, and definitely information about what's going on with the census, what they can do to go on the website. They can go online and fill out the census questionnaire. We're talking about 10 questions per person, per household. Basic questions: your name, your date of birth, your age, your race, whether or not you're Hispanic ethnicity, whether you rent or own your home. These very basic questions, and from those very 10 basic questions, we derive a lot of different information that helps make major decisions.
No, I want to make sure we're clear. So each person in the house should or somebody needs to fill out a separate form for them.
No. I'm glad you're asking that question, because this is what this is all about. There, you will get. Let's just look at the paper questionnaire, because that's the one we're most familiar with. A paper questionnaire arrives addressed to the resident of the house that address. One person in the household is considered head of household, and then there's space on the paper questionnaire. I think it's up to about 6 or 7 people.
Okay.
For them to complete the questionnaire, and they would be asked the same questions for every resident or member of that household. There actually could be members of the household that are not blood related or family related.
True.
Okay, but they need to go on that census questionnaire. And definitely, I want to go back to the point of counting everyone in the household, no matter how young they are or how old they are, but especially young, because we know that the second largest undercounted group or not miscounted group is children under the age of 5.
Because the parents forget or don't?
We're not really sure what that's about. It's across all socioeconomic strata that children under 5 are missed. And of course, to what we were talking about earlier, you miss counting children under 5, and then 10 years or 15 years, you have a surprise.
Right.
Because you're not
You've
ready
got this
to
bubble that you never
exactly.
thought about.
You have this bubble that you're not prepared to deal with in terms of school buses, the private sector in terms of how they're gearing up with supplies and products. All across the board, you're not ready. So it's very important that everybo's counted in the household.
A question I have. some technicalities. Son away at college, where does he get counted?
If there's a son or daughter away at college where they're spending the majority of their time, they're counted in the town or city or village where they're going to school.
So
Whether they're on campus or off campus, it doesn't matter. Because they are the census is a little bit different. It doesn't matter where your legal residence is or where your voting area, it's where you are utilizing the resources. So if you're from St. Louis and you're going to school in Columbia or Maryville or New York or wherever it may be, and that's where you're spending most of your time
by
during
calendar.
the year, yes, exactly. Most of your time, then that's where you're counted.
And the other one is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to really clarify the definition of a household for the census, right? So some people think, oh, do you have to live in a house? No, you could live in an apartment. Does it have to be your immediate family? It doesn't have to be your immediate family. It's whoever you live with. It could be you and 3 of your friends living in an apartment off campus. And if, so you fill it out for all 4 of you. And then for those people, for the purposes of Missouri, that's about $50,000 over the next 10 years. So, yeah, there's just some misconceptions sometimes.
Now, I know there's been lawsuits, and I want to get into all of that, but it had to do with small communities wanting to have prisoners use that particular address of the prison as their for census purposes versus where they originally came from.
I can't really respond to that, but I can just say this, that prisoners are counted where they are imprisoned.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So we get through with that. Right. And so it is, again, where services are utilized.
Yes, but not completely. It gets a little bit more complicated than that, and I don't want to confuse our listeners. But that you can visit our website. There's one information that we have on our website that I know both Carolyn and Ed are familiar with is harkens back to the 1790 Census Act, March of 1790, which talks about a place of usual abode. But it's for most of the people in the country, they will know where that home is. But there are percentages and segments of our population where more transient. We can get into talking about the people experiencing homelessness. We could, for example, one of this, I'll use this as an example, is a child that is split between households in terms of mom and dad or guardians. So that, for example, with that child, this is where April 1st comes into play. Wherever they happen to be, whichever parent or guardian they're with on April 1st, that's where they're counted. For example, a foster child would be the same situation. So April 1st does come into play in terms of, for certain segments of the population, in terms of where they happen to be on that date.
But an important point to make also is we don't want people waiting until April 1st to turn in their forms or to fill out their forms. So
they can do that beforehand.
They can do it before
because they
April
get the
1st.
mailing
absolutely
before that.
As soon as that form arrives, or as soon as they have knowledge that the website and the phone lines are active, get your thumbs out and get busy, or get your pen out. If it's a paper version, you don't need to, and we don't want you to wait until April 1st.
So as soon as you get that resident mail, you can go ahead.
If you are mailed the questionnaire, again, I said earlier, I know that only 20% of the households in the country are going to immediately be mailed a paper questionnaire. And then if they haven't responded to a series of mailings that we're doing by the 3rd or 4th, then that household will be mailed a questionnaire. Our initial mailings are going to ask people to go to the website. And so what we're saying here is don't wait until April 1st, the Census Day. As soon as the website is live, the phone lines are live, go there and complete your census form.
Okay. So I think we're getting close to the date now in this conversation of April 1st. What would you like to see? So if you could wave your magic wand, what would you like to see city, county do before we get to that day?
They're already doing it. those pieces are already coming together, and I think will gain a lot of traction and momentum and growth and expansion and sweat equity, quite frankly, when we start into next year. I know that they will be rolling out, like other communities, buttons. They will be possibly having street teams. They will maybe have a speakers bureau, all a range of different things in terms of reaching people on a continuous basis, bottom up, top down, sideways, and every which way. I mean, again, it goes back to the 7 touches and repeated touches. We only do this every 10 years. And so for a good segment of our population, this will be their first census, and for other segments, it's time to do the census, So we have to, and in some ways, continually remind people what this is, which we started off talking about. What is the census, why it's important, and then also the mechanics. How is it going to roll out? How can I access it? How can I get help with filling out the census questionnaire?
I think something important to remember is that this information is kept confidential. So under Title 13, it's kept confidential. It's not meant to be shared with, other entities. And so, for example, if you happen to be living maybe in a single-family dwelling, but you're more than one family, that information is not going to be shared with the local housing agency, right? So the census is really just, we want to count every single individual who lives in the U.S.
And I think it's important to say on what Caroline just to add to that is that when we publish the data from the census, there are no names and personally identifiable information connected with those numbers. We publish just numbers, not any personally identifiable information. So everyone in the household needs to be counted. If students are living there, one student's on the lease and the others are not, those other students that live in that household we need to count. And we will not go back and tell the university or the landlord or the city officials or the county officials that you're breaking the law and you're not up to code in terms of compliance, or the landlord. People need to know that we don't share this information with law enforcement, any entities at all. It's kept confidential under law.
So, first question is, April 1st comes, and maybe May 1st comes, and maybe June 1st comes. When, if I don't fill out the census, what takes place? And I want to talk about the enumerators first, and then we'll talk about something else.
I can't really give you a specific date for. Let me put it in these terms. Because it's going to happen differently in different parts of the metro area here. There are certain census tracts where we already have a past being prologue. We know that we're probably may not have the greatest response, and so we're kind of concentrating with our partners, the city, county, et cetera. So as people respond to the census online, by phone, and by paper, as the case may be, we will keep a track of that going on. In fact, our website will have a live active map where you can see fairly much up to date in terms of real time of what's going on in terms of people responding.
So you'll be able to so people will be able to track what's going on in their specific area.
Exactly.
The number of people who have filled out, and also the number of people who haven't.
The number of households.
The number of households.
Right.
I'm sorry.
That's
Thank
fine.
you.
That's fine.
Household.
No, the number of households that responded. So to go to your point there, and after a certain time, in census tracts in certain communities, we will, if a household hasn't responded, they go on our non-response follow-up list. And that's why we're needing to hire lots of people, recruit at least lots of people to do that. And they'll be trained to go out and actually conduct the census with the person at their address.
Door to
To
door,
knock on
fill
door.
out the-
Yes, exactly. To knock on the door and to conduct the census face-to-face, if you will, the pre-1960 way of doing it.
And so, at some point, that will take place, and we're hoping to substantially boost the number of people who fill out the census form.
On the front side.
On the front
and
side.
then on the back
to
side,
make it easier
our
on the
partners,
right.
Ed, Carolyn, and others, and the Complete Count Committee of the city, the county, other organizations that have partnered with us, NAACP, LUTLAC, et cetera, we will go to them or already starting a conversation with them and say, this is a critical point in the arc of the census calendar. Mm-hmm. At this time, we'll need for you to tell people it's safe, encourage them to participate, to cooperate with the enumerators that are coming around.
What legally happens to me if I don't fill out the census?
It is part of the Constitution. To my knowledge, no one has ever been prosecuted or anything of that nature by not participating. I think the question, what we try to work from is a standpoint of persuasion and definitely letting someone know that you have skin in this game, and it's encouraging them to take the responsibility to stand up and be counted, because there's a lot that rides on it that they may not necessarily be aware of.
Now, we were talking last night about the number of language issues. How many languages, so hopefully I'll get this right. How many languages is the printed version, and how many languages are online accessible?
The printed version has 2 languages, English and Spanish. Online, there are 13 different languages, 14 including English, and then we have language assistance guides in a total of 59 different languages.
So we should cover the waterfront, at least language-wise, perhaps with participant organizations doing translation.
Yes. We should cover and the language assistance guides are not questionnaires, but they're guides that will help people in those 59 languages to be able to answer the census. And working with organizations that already have bridges built and trust factors with people that are bilingual or trilingual, whatever the case may be, is really important as well.
Now, Ed, you were talking last night about how you were volunteering your services to the United Way. Mm-hmm. I don't want to sort of ask you the United Way role, but the role of nonprofits as you see it, helping out in this process.
Yeah, so I think for us, our United Way made this a policy priority for us back last year, because we understand, because of our line of sight into the health and human services sector, not just only in the state of Missouri, but also even nationally, because United Way Worldwide is also a national partner with the Census Bureau, that the dollars that we receive from the federal programs impact our clients. And so our work, even though we raised over $76 million in St. Louis last year, our dollars are dwarfed by the amount of dollars that come from the state as well as from the federal government. So that sector is really paid for by residents and citizens and taxpayers. So for us, we want to make sure that we are able to fully leverage the community's dollars that come to us, that we redistribute to our member agencies, but also we recognize that the agencies, 162 member agencies currently that provide quality health and human services to the residents and citizens and here in our 16 county metro region, that we're able to fully leverage the impact of those dollars and make those dollars go further. So for us, excuse me, the health and human services sector, and I can think of many of our member agencies, they are the eyes and ears, they're the hands and the feet, people that are touching folks who have a variety of different needs, whether they are needs due to poverty and due to access and due to inability and inequity, or a variety of different things. And so we want to make sure that those people who have that expertise are able to leverage that expertise and those connections to make sure that our folks are counted. So a couple of things that we want to make sure that we do along the way is that just as Emmett said, that we are tracking the operational calendar and timeline of the Census Bureau, so we can understand when we need to do what, in particular when we need to deliver certain messages. And also, we're leveraging our reputation. United Way is a trusted partner in the community, and folks, when we show up on an issue, Folks typically don't tend to ask why is United Way here, because when we've already done the due diligence to understand this is an important issue for our region. So if we show up in the business community and try to encourage them, this is an important issue, then we've already gotten over, because of our reputation, there are already a couple of hurdles that have already been kind of gotten over. And so we want to make sure that that the reputation that we've built for almost 100 years in the community is truly leveraged to the benefit of the community, to make sure that on this particular issue, this is one that we can pull together on shoulder to shoulder, and that's what we want to encourage the community to do.
So there's a push by nonprofit organizations to touch the people that you serve, remind them about the census and the importance, and you know.
And to also leverage their community connection expertise, as we talked about language barriers. Some of our member agencies actually have expertise in that area, and so that's an area that they can leverage. Some have expertise in the areas of meeting the needs of young kids under 5 years old. So they already know what the needs are, and so trying to convince them that making sure that we have full access to the federal dollars that we are due to. We don't have to convince them of that. But what they can do is leverage that to convince the clients that they meet and that they're actually touching every day to pay attention to that card. As you mentioned earlier, don't throw it away. Keep it.
Just because it says resident, there's a reason why it says that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Carolyn, without putting any particular group on the spot, who would you like to see included in the conversation that either on a state level or on one of the local levels, because you do both the city and the county, who's missing?
So I think, nonprofits are definitely at the table. Government agencies are at the table. I think one of the groups I'd like to see more of, and I think part of what the census is, right, is it's about building partnerships and having the trusted validators in every community kind of be like, hey, we all need to fill out the census. So that could be a nonprofit leader, it could be a faith leader, but it could also be a business leader, right? And so I'm working with some of the small businesses where the Asian American community already goes, and they'll, we'll do like census dim sums at Lulu's, right? Where people are already there on the weekends, and we'll have tablets for them to fill it out. But, I think it's also important for the regional employers to show up and, remind their employees that they have to fill out the census. Because at the end of the day, right?
Because it doesn't, to your point, it doesn't say what time of day. They can be at their desk at work and fill it out then and be done with it. Because there's no geography about where you fill it out. It's not like voting where you have to go to a specific address to vote. You can do it anywhere as long as you do it.
Yeah, and so I think I'd love to see some of the larger businesses come out and really be like, and they all signed a letter with the, a number of them signed a letter with the Missouri Foundation for Health, but I'd love to see more of them on TV and in the press being like, hey, it's important for our region to make sure that everyone gets counted because we all use these roads, right? We want to make sure, to Emmett's point from earlier, if you're surprised and there's like a boomlet of kids being born that we're not capturing, it's not just about making sure that there are school buildings ready for them, school buses ready for them, but it's also about preparing for the future workforce. And so I think one of the things I've been gratified to see, and I'm working with the Tendo for Africa and Hispanic Leaders Group, is I'm seeing, the immigrant and refugee communities showing up because they understand, that this is an important thing for our community, even though there are certain concerns and fears that exist. And I think, like I said, everyone has a role to play. I definitely have a self-interest in that. I drive some of these roads, and I hit some potholes this morning. I was like, we need that census money.
Or for the bus, by the way, you can, which is publicly funded.
And one thing I will add, it's like we talk about the dollars. The dollars are really important, but I also want to encourage folks this is a real opportunity to be active civically, in our country. And I think sometimes we overlook the ability and opportunities that we have to be civically engaged within our communities as just citizens and residents, and to be as members of a civil society, quote unquote. And this is one of the things that really encourages me, about the opportunity around the decennial census, around the 10-year census. That this is an opportunity where we get to, there is only a handful of things that people in the United States get to do that we all get to do, whether we're citizens or not, to exercise our ability of civically, and the decennial census is one of them. The others, such as being registered to vote, you have to be a citizen. To be served on the jury, you have to be a citizen. But this is an opportunity where we have to really kind of be civically engaged, and I really want to encourage folks. I think particularly today, where we have this this extreme polarization in our nations. This is why one of the things that we lean into and we try to encourage are those kind of civic values. St. Louis is one of the most civically engaged and philanthropically engaged and generous communities in the nation. Our United Way campaign is the largest United Way campaign in the nation now. So one of the things that we always lean into and try to remind folks in our region is this is who St. Louis is. We are a very civically engaged community, and this is just one of the things that we can do to make sure that we maintain and even grow and make sure that our community continues to grow and be a flourishing community.
I think Ed's right. It is also definitely about representation. We're on a civil rights show, right?
Yeah.
So the census is literally about being counted, right? And so if you don't get counted, does your voice then get represented?
True.
Yeah.
Emmett, if you know this,
He knows
what was
everything.
he knows everything. What was the percentage of count 10 years ago? Do you know how Missouri did?
Well, I can speak to Missouri. Missouri's mail-back participation rate per household was 74%, and that tied with the national average of 74%. However, you had other states. I think the number one state was Wisconsin at about 83%, meaning that 83% of the households in Wisconsin immediately responded right away to the census. And so the difference between that were households that we had to go around door to door and do non-response follow-up. So there were other states that I think Arkansas was around 69% a mail-back response rate. That's per household. That's not saying that only 74% of the population was counted. That's just saying that 74% of the households participated, and the difference we had to go around door to door and do non-response follow-up.
So we were close to the national average.
We were close to the national average, but that's just the 30,000-foot view.
Mm-hmm.
And as we start to zoom in on the county specifically, on the cities specifically, on the different tracks within the cities and counties in Missouri, St. Louis, wherever, it starts to tell a different story. There are census tracts who had higher response rates than the national average, but there are also, and this is part of our target focus, those that did not, for a variety of reasons, just in terms of their makeup. So those are areas with our partners that we're concentrating on quite heavily because we know that past being prologue, those are areas where we need to give extra attention to in terms of making people aware, mitigating fear and misinformation, and also encouraging them to participate.
Which is the maps that we saw yesterday of the darker, and maybe I'll figure out how to get this on the CREA website on the city's page, is the dark areas actually showed lack of participation or a reduced participation rate than previously.
On that particular map, I think it's the reverse of what you're saying. The darker areas showed better responses, and the lighter areas showed less of a response.
Okay.
We have two different maps out there. The other map is our a map based on the American Community Survey, which is done 5 and 1 year intervals. And we're using information from that in terms of how households are responding to the American Community Survey with our partners to indicate areas where their people are not willing to participate. So
you're sort of juggling two different maps.
we're using both. We're using
to
the one from 10 years ago and the map that was from a year ago or 5 years ago from the American Community Survey, because it's more immediate information, although it is sample data of households and census tracts that are less likely to participate in the American Community Survey.
So between those two maps, you've sort of identified areas of more intense need for more intense activity.
Exactly. Similar to what maybe a doctor would do to looking at an x-ray or whatever, where does the attention need to be focused? And then the other factor that comes into play is the hard to count population that we talked about at the beginning of the show is veterans. And so we can look at data that the Census Bureau does to look at a particular census tract, and you can get a snapshot of how that area is composed, which will inform your plan of action.
So to Carolyn's point, hold on a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
To Carolyn's point, it's your name, et cetera, that's sort of hidden, but all the other information that is compiled is not compiled by anybody but the Census Department. So you all have a accurate picture of age, I assume race and ethnicity. Trying to think of the other questions and
Gender.
veterans and gender.
Yeah.
So you have the ability to say, in this particular area, we expect to see these people who don't exist when filling out the form. So, for example, X amount of people in a particular area may be a veteran. You may not be seeing that.
We can use, basically, I think, to answer your question, we can use the information that we have from the American Community Survey to get a demographic profile of certain areas. And based on what we know about hard to enumerate populations, we can say, well, this area has more seniors, or this area has more veterans, or this area has more children under 5, or more Hispanics, or more people that are immigrants or other languages spoken at home than English. So that gives us really a good treasure trove of information, again, to inform the approach, to inform who are the messengers, and also what are the messages.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My show next Tuesday, I'm a month late, but my show next Tuesday is African Americans who served in the military. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And you had,
that was the point. One of the points that Emmett made was so when we going back to those maps, when you look at those hard to count census tracts, one of the things that the kind of coming back to like the nonprofit sector, if you were to overlap or look at those census tracts, you can tell where those potential partners may be. Because when I looked at those maps yesterday, because I know where some of our agencies are and are located, my mind immediately went to, okay, this is a hard to count census tract. I know what nonprofits are kind of in that area as potential partners, as potential messenger carriers, and so it's going to help us more effectively partner with the Census Bureau when it comes time for them to ramp up around the enumerators and the people that are going to be going door to door, because then we'll have a better sense of who those potential partners are, and then we can advise and counsel and provide and provide them with information. Okay, here's a nonprofit that serves kids in that area. Here's a nonprofit in that area that does this. That does language services. So then we can help develop our strategies and make them more robust around that time when we need them to be.
Shameless plug, but to your point, I sit on the board at Northside Youth and Senior Service Center, and when I looked at the map, that was the first thing I saw.
Yep.
Because I sit on the board, we already had that conversation 2 months ago at a board meeting of this is what's coming, what is our role, because we actually do two things, as you know. We people come in for services, but also we do about 1,000 plus senior meals every day virtually. So both on the end of people coming in, both seniors and kids, as well as we're sending out meals every day. We have the ability to impact a lot of that geography.
And
that
because you have direct access to those clients, and you can probably know better than even I would know what the barriers may be for them not completing a census form. The barriers may be that it may be a barrier of trust. Maybe they don't trust the federal government. Then as the person and organization that meets those clients and that they trust, because they're allowing you to feed them meals or provide services to their kids, then you can carry the message and help them ameliorate that trust issue. It may be an issue of internet access. the digital divide is real. So I mean, so those are the kind of things that we have to work in partnership together to help understand what are the best strategies to get to make sure that we get a complete and accurate count.
I mean, you talked about Chicago for a minute, so I want to go back to that in a few minutes we have left. I'm thinking about the immigrant and refugee population in the city and in the region. Are there models that are around that the city-county region can utilize based on previous history that would help us impact several different communities? I know the LGBTQI community, I know the immigrant population and the community. Are there models around that we can kind of say, well, they did that successfully there? We may tinker with it, but we can utilize it here.
I think there are models around from the previous censuses, at least the most recent 2010. There are also best practices, which would probably be the word that we use more so than models, because even if there's a model, it's going to have to be localized and customized to fit that particular geography and that particular community. And I would also say that the best models are homegrown. The best practices are homegrown. Coming up that a community, a organization coming up with its own strategies and techniques. We are here at the Census Bureau to provide, we have information on special initiatives, outreach to veterans, LGBTQ, but even that information that we would offer and readily offer and give still needs to be localized. It still needs to be made, put into a fashion of, again, back to the message, some translation there, and also who is going to be delivering the message, because those are both important factors. And we've just, you were just talking, and Ed was, as well as Carolyn. Trust is a big factor here. We have the means now in this day and age to deliver let everybody know about it and what it is. But that's only a third or 2/3 of the big lift here is trust. And so if everyone, in an ideal world, could take upon themselves to have the responsibility of the people most in their immediate sphere, to get them to 5 people, 10 people, that we know we all have those people that will listen to us, that follow us, that trust us, really, really trust us and what we say. We know that we would not steer them wrong. That type of exponential or multiplier effect would just be tremendous. And that's really what we're trying to build on with the census, is that, yes, there's a broader message, billboards, social media, Facebook, advertising on the MetroLink, but there's also that household relationship and the family relationship and community relationship and friends and professional relationships, of making sure that you're taking care of the people that are in your orbit, letting them know that this is something that needs to be done.
So we've got a couple of minutes left. We've talked about the process, but we haven't talked about the end game. So when does the census end, quote unquote, and then when do we get to know the results? We're talking about wrap up around July, August in terms of ending NORFU. I'm not specific on that, but basically end of the summer or midsummer. And we have a deadline.
Use an acronym that you mean better, NORFU.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. NORFU is non-response follow-up. That's the operation where we go around door to door. I don't want to belittle it in any way, to get to those people that have not responded to the census. Thank you very much, Ed. And so the first numbers that we have to deliver to the president are the entire count of the country, what's called the apportionment count, and that deadline is December 31st of 2020. And then our next big deadline is March 31st of 2021. We have to deliver the redistricting count numbers to the respective states so that they can begin the process of redistricting for congressional and all the way down to various local election and voting districts.
I know first it would be the Board of Aldermen, St. Louis County, I'm sure.
State of Missouri.
State of Missouri, yeah.
And so after that, then more and more specific information will be rolled out over the next few years that goes into granular, more information.
Which then gets to, as we've been talking about, the road improvements or the money that goes to various functions in government. even stuff that's given to the state, that is state is a pass through to go to cities. Part of that is probably census data that's utilized.
Yeah, the data will inform those decisions and not determine, but definitely inform those decisions. And for services and goods and across all specters, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and also the governmental sector and the business sector.
Let's do last words. Carolyn first.
Everyone has a role to play in the 2020 census, so remember to fill it out and encourage your friends and family to do so as well. And the best thing I think we can do at this point is to educate people, but then also to get folks to apply so that we have the census workers to go door to door. One of the best practices I've found is if you have people who speak the language, who look like the people you're trying to reach out to, so we want to make sure that we have a lot of diverse applicants.
Very true. Ed?
Yeah, this is your chance for our region, for residents in our region to be counted, to make sure that the federal dollars that we have really dire need of to meet the health and human services of our residents and people here, to make sure those dollars come back to Missouri. So pay attention, be aware, and fill out the census form.
And Emmett, would you please once again give everybody the phone number and the
sure.
the
I'm going to
email
start
address.
off with talking about this is definitely a people business. We need people. We count people. We need people to apply for census jobs. That website is 2020census.gov/jobs. Again, 2020census, census.gov/jobs. Or you can call the number 855-562-2020. The census is about counting everyone, counting them once, and counting them in the right place. It's about the Constitution. It's about representation. It's about $675 billion that is distributed annually of the federal budget. It's about redistricting. It's about the civic duty. Your privacy is protected. It's safe, it's easy, it's important, and people need to be existential about the census, to be here, to be present, and to stand up and be counted.
Thank you all. Emmett, I would like to extend an invitation in March as we begin to get closer to April 1st. You're all invited at any point in time.
And I
but
thank
certainly
you for
in March,
this opportunity,
we want to get you back here
we will
and let everybody know.
Be happy to come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. We're out.